Tonight at 10, West Midlands Police apologise after an inquest jury finds their mistakes contributed to the murder of two women who'd repeatedly reported domestic abuse. Raneem Uday and her mother, Khawla Salim, were murdered by Raneem's estranged husband. Family members say they were badly let down.
West Midlands Police have failed Khawla and Raneem beyond imagination. They had so many opportunities to save their lives.
The force says it will learn from its mistakes. Also on tonight's programme. The death of Zara Alina, the law graduate attacked as she walked home in East London last summer. A man pleads guilty to her murder. A last-minute U-turn by FIFA with just 2 days to kick off. Alcohol won't be allowed in the stadiums at the Qatar World Cup.
I don't think it necessarily bodes well, given that they've had 12 years to think about these kind of things and they're changing it so last minute.
I think people will be more upset at the U-turn than not being able to actually drink.
And continuing Twitter turmoil, staff have been locked out of their offices after the warning to work long hours or leave.
On BBC London, councils are facing tough choices as one leader warns of significant cuts to spending. We take a look at what it'll mean for the capital's most vulnerable.
Hello, good evening. West Midlands Police have apologised after an inquest jury found that mistakes made by the force materially contributed to the death of a woman and her mother who'd repeatedly reported domestic violence. Raneem Uday and her mother, Khawla Salim, were stabbed to death by Raneem's estranged husband in 2018. He's now serving a minimum of 32 years in prison for their murder. In the final hours of her life, Raneem Uday made 6 999 calls to the police. Her family say the force failed them beyond imagination. Our correspondent Phil Mackey was at the inquest in Birmingham. You may find the details in his report. Distressing.
Raneem Alda on the left and her mother Khawla Salim, a mother and daughter badly let down by the people who should have been protecting them.
West Midlands Police have failed Khawla and Raneem beyond imagination. They had so many opportunities to save their lives. Right up until the end, both were murdered while on the phone to the police begging for help.
Days before the pair were murdered, a court granted an order preventing Jambaz Tareen from going anywhere near his former partner. But this is him following her on a night out. There was a row. You can see Raneem's mother intervening. Then Raneem made a series of 999 calls, but officers were busy elsewhere and no one came.
Police emergency, what's the location of the emergency? Well, hi, I just called the police about more than half an hour ago, and actually I'm in danger. My ex-partner came and he actually harmed me and harmed my mom as well.
The last call came later as she was being attacked and she and her mother were screaming. Even though Raneem called for help on a number of occasions in the months before she died, the police either failed to record things properly, didn't investigate, and when calls were made a priority, they didn't respond.
I felt like they really empowered the perpetrator rather than helping the victim. Along the way, my sister, she lost hope. Slowly, she started not calling them as much as she was before.
This was Tareen being arrested a few days later. He'd been making threats for months, but despite repeated calls, the police never made an arrest. The family said they hoped the women's deaths would be a catalyst for change. The Independent Office for Police Conduct served misconduct notices on 9 officers with West Midlands Police, 5 of whom were given management action, another received some extra training, and West Midlands Police has issued a fulsome apology to the family today. It said it really let them down and it failed in its duty to safeguard both Raneem and ultimately her mother as well. What they've also said is they've invested more in extra resources, specifically to deal with cases of domestic violence. They've also created a new unit to review cases like this in the hope that something like this won't happen again. Speaking to the family today, though, Jane, they don't think any of this has gone far enough.
Phil Mackey, thank you. Just 2 days before the Men's Football World Cup kicks off in Qatar, the sports governing body, FIFA, has banned the sale of alcohol to fans inside stadiums. It's a last-minute U-turn on a deal which was signed with Qatar back in 2010. Budweiser, which has a multi-million-dollar contract for the rights to sell its beer at the matches, says there's nothing it can do about it. From Qatar, here's our sports editor, Dan Rowan.
The Qatar World Cup had already moved to winter, now another unprecedented shift of the goalposts. Despite alcohol sales being tightly controlled in this Muslim country, fans had been told beer would be available within stadia. But just 2 days before the start of the tournament, FIFA bowed to pressure from the hosts and announced an embarrassing U-turn, with sales now confined to fan zones. Budweiser, a multi-million-pound sponsor of the World Cup, tried to make light of the situation in a since-deleted tweet, but some fans already here were unimpressed.
I don't think it necessarily bodes well, given that they've had 12 years to think about these kind of things and they're changing it so last minute.
I don't really care about the beer, but it's like, what else could change?
Just 24 hours ago at a legacy event in Doha, the man responsible for delivering the World Cup told me all was on track.
We're ready, the team's ready, the operational team is ready, everything else is going on. We've always talked about football beyond the stadiums, a platform to bring people together, a platform to push forward progress for change and so on. This is what it's all about.
But today's U-turn is just the latest controversy to hit an event that was meant to be the perfect advert for this immensely rich Gulf state. Suspicion marring the build-up ever since FIFA voted for it 12 years ago. Despite extreme summer heat and no footballing history, the hosts denying allegations of corruption. But no matter how implausible it may seem to so many, the first World Cup in the Middle East has arrived. Just as Doha has risen from the desert over the last 30 years, no less dramatic has been the way that a host of new stadia and huge amounts of infrastructure have been built for this groundbreaking World Cup, one that the hosts hope will elevate the status of their country. But it's the human cost of such colossal investment that's brought with it unprecedented levels of scrutiny. Thousands of migrant workers have died in Qatar since 2010, and while organisers insist very few are due to working on stadium construction, campaigners say official data isn't reliable and recent reforms don't go far enough. Today, a vocal critic of the tournament told me how he felt about being here.
So there's kind of queasy feeling around it at the moment. You know, there are significant issues around this World Cup, obviously, with human rights issues, what's happened with the building of the stadiums and workers' rights and homophobia. Well, I think it is tainted.
But current players have had their say too. Both England and Wales among a number of teams who'll wear armbands as part of a non-discrimination campaign in a country where being gay is illegal.
I think any gay fans coming here would be safe. Sadly, some of our fan groups, Three Lions Pride, most of the members have decided not to come. That's their personal decision. But we have repeatedly asked for assurances that gay fans would be safe here, and we understand they will be.
You've had the reassurances that you need?
Right from the top of the country, yes.
Qatar wanted this World Cup to help boost its growing global influence, and it's been stung by some of the criticism. Others, however, fear football's showpiece is about to be exploited. Rarely has the build-up to this event felt quite so divisive. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Doha.
A man has pleaded guilty to the murder of Zara Alina, the 35-year-old who was attacked as she walked home in East London last summer after a night out. Jordan McSweeney had been released from prison on licence only days earlier. Helena Wilkinson reports from the Old Bailey.
Days after Zara Alina's murder, hundreds came together to honour her. They were in shock too that another woman had been killed as she walked home alone. To her family, Zara Alina was independent, big-hearted and a joy. She'd started work at the Royal Courts of Justice. They say she was the happiest she had ever been. But her dreams, her life ended when she was murdered by a stranger. This is him, Jordan McSweeney. in the early hours of the 26th of June before he attacked the 35-year-old. He followed Miss Alina, dragged her onto a driveway and sexually assaulted her. She died from multiple injuries after being repeatedly kicked. Today at the Old Bailey, McSweeney pleaded guilty to murder and guilty to sexual assault.
She was attacked while walking alone on a residential street. She had every right to be there. She had every right to feel safe. But instead, she was the victim of shocking violence.
At an earlier hearing here at the Old Bailey, the court heard that McSweeney had 28 previous convictions for 69 separate offences. When he murdered Zara Alina, he was out on licence, having been released from prison less than 2 weeks earlier. Zara Alina's family might have been spared the ordeal of a trial, but they'll be back in court next month when McSweeney will be sentenced. Helena Wilkinson, BBC News at the Old Bailey.
Delegates at the UN climate meeting in Egypt are still haggling about help for developing nations affected by the climate crisis. The summit was due to end today, but it's being extended in the hope of reaching a deal. The US Special Envoy John Kerry has tested positive for COVID, but is continuing to take part in negotiations by phone. From Sharm el-Sheikh, here's our climate editor, Justin Rolat.
Tropical storms in the Caribbean, drought in Kenya, floods in Pakistan. The science says these weather events are being made more severe by climate change. So who should pay for the loss and damage they cause? That is the question here in Egypt.
Vulnerability should not become a death sentence, and that's what it's slowly becoming for countries that are in the front line of climate impacts that we did very little to create. We did not create global warming.
No media surface, yeah? In these talks, developing countries have insisted on a dedicated fund for this loss and damage. Developed countries said no. Then late last night, the EU said it would agree, but there were conditions.
We need to reduce the amount of damage by reducing emissions and putting that into the deal. We need a broader base of funding. We need other countries.
And saving the planet from disastrous consequences.
The EU says it shouldn't only be wealthy countries that pay, and it's got a point. Take a look how the emissions of the world's biggest polluters have changed over the last 4 decades. China has overtaken the US to become the world's top polluter. And look at this, India is now in 3rd position. But China and India have always said they are developing countries with huge populations and shouldn't have to contribute. So now there is a whole new set of issues under discussion.
There's still a lot to be figured out. We've got over 200 countries trying to address multiple items at the same time, and it's a difficult job, as you can imagine. It's not easy.
These talks were supposed to have ended this afternoon. It now looks like they'll continue long into the night. Justin Rolat, BBC News, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
The UK has entered a new era of higher taxes, according to the research body, the Institute for Fiscal Studies. It says middle earners are set for a shock, with taxes going up and prices soaring. The Chancellor has admitted that families will face real challenges, but said the measures he announced yesterday in the autumn statement will help tame inflation. Our economics editor, Faisal Islam, reports.
Swindon the day after an extraordinary autumn statement. Even at this networking meeting of women entrepreneurs, the historic middle income hit is apparent to all in this squeezed Swindon.
It's just scary, really. Me and my husband both work full time, and our disposable income is shrinking month by month. Our mortgage has gone up, childcare costs have gone up, food bills, obviously energy bills.
In terms of the pound in their pockets, most people will be worse off in the coming years. This shows how the impact by 2028 of tax and benefit policy changes since a year ago differs. Adding the policies before yesterday in blue and from the autumn statement in yellow, middle to high earners were the hardest hit by changes to tax and benefits. Those in the poorest households, earning around £13,000 a year, stand to be a few £100s better off by 2028. The richest households, with an average income of £135,000, will be more than £2,500 worse off. But those in the middle, earning between £35,000 and £42,000, will be between £350 and £600 worse off, a significant proportion of their incomes.
People on average earnings, maybe they're earning 25, 30, even £40,000 a year, they're going to be feeling a lot worse off over the next couple of years. Prices are going up, their earnings won't be going up in general as fast as prices.
Good to see you again.
Visiting Swindon after a set of forecasts that depict an historic economic challenge and constraints that could last years, the opposition top team making a rather big claim.
The Labour Party, under my leadership, is the party of sound money. We would make different choices. I don't hear anybody in our movement, trade union or otherwise, or actually across the country, that can accept for a moment that it's fair to go again after working people.
There is a key question in the back and forth between the main political parties. Can the opposition, currently riding high in the polls, diverge far from the plans outlined yesterday by the actual Chancellor, whose plans were today backed by the IMF?
The measures that we announced yesterday will make the recession lighter. It'll mean that around 70,000 jobs are saved. So I think that will give people confidence that, yes, this is difficult, but there's a plan, we're going to get through it.
But some economists and union leaders urged Labour not to even accept the premise of a borrowing black hole so they could spend more on things like public sector pay.
Do you fundamentally accept that there's a 2% of national income consolidation required, about £50 billion?
Well, look, I accept that they've done huge damage to our economy, not just in the last 12 weeks, but over the last 12 years. And we will come into government and we will have to face that challenge.
The baseline you accept?
Well, we accept that because of the errors of this government, that we are in difficult economic times now. The argument we have is not with the Office for Budget Responsibility. Our argument is with the government, that they've made the wrong choices.
So while their methods may differ, the government and opposition accept the same starting point, that there are £55 billion of tax rises or spending cuts required to repair the public finances. Shared tough choices for a tricky future. Faisal Islam, BBC News in Swindon.
Well, meanwhile, the government has been criticised for its decision to delay the introduction of a cap on the amount that people have to pay for their social care in England. Our social affairs editor, Alison Holt, is with me with more details on that. Alison.
Thank you, Jane. Well, the government is trying to juggle finding money for a care system that has record staff vacancies and faces a crisis right now, against long-promised reforms to help families in England who can face huge costs, for instance, providing care for someone with dementia over many years. Last year, the government set out plans to introduce an £86,000 cap or limit to the care costs a person could face over their lifetime. At the moment, only those with savings or assets of less than £23,250 are eligible for council care. The reforms would have increased that threshold to £100,000, allowing people to keep more of their money. But those plans, due to be introduced next October, are now on the back burner for at least 2 years. And that has a human cost.
Paula Connor is living with the twin problems facing the care system in England: finding care and the cost.
It's been very, very tough, and I'm a tough person normally, but it's destroying me. It is.
Her 89-year-old husband Mick has dementia. He was stuck in hospital for weeks as she struggled to find a good care home with a place. He's moved into one an hour away. It costs £65,000 a year, eating up savings set aside for both their retirements.
£65,000 a year. It won't last more than 2 years at the most. I don't not understand why, when you've worked hard all your life, you have to pay. All right, a small contribution maybe, but these kind of fees are just terrific. And then, of course, when all that goes, what do I live off?
We will fix the crisis in social care once and for all.
Fixing social care was a key promise made by the Conservatives, with the cap on care costs central to those plans. Sir Andrew Dilnot, who devised the policy, says he's astounded by the delay and the need for reform is urgent.
We have a system that is creaking, that is falling apart, that is putting enormous pressure on the wonderful people who deliver the care, as well as the individuals who need the care and their families. It's hard to think of a more vulnerable group than people in that position, and our system is something that we should all be ashamed of.
The government says the delay frees up money to help provide more support for older and disabled people right now. But these are reforms that Jeremy Hunt argued for before he became Chancellor.
I do believe in those reforms that Andrew Dilnot has championed very much. But in the end, this 2-year delay means that we can increase funding available to local authorities by £4.7 billion over the next 2 years. That's the biggest increase we've ever had in social care.
For Paula and other families, more help now is vital, but so is a plan for the future. Alison Holt, BBC News.
And just to let you know, you can find more analysis of the autumn statement and our cost of living tackling it together section on BBC News Online, bbc.co.uk/news, or by using the BBC News app. Heavy rain has caused widespread flooding in parts of eastern Scotland, including Aberdeenshire and Angus. Rail services have been disrupted, roads closed, and some homes are without power. Police Scotland say their search for a woman who'd reportedly been swept into the River Don has been stood down for the evening because of the conditions. Lorna Gordon is in Ballater in Aberdeenshire tonight. Lorna.
Yeah, Jane, it's eased now, but in some parts of eastern Scotland, more rain has fallen in the last 48 hours than would normally be experienced in the entire month of November. It's caused severe disruption on the rail network, some really tricky localised flooding on the roads. And in places like here in Ballater, where the river burst its bank, some homes have been flooded. Police have gone door to door to check on residents. The power still remains out this evening in some streets, and dozens of people have chosen to spend the evening in a local hall where there's warmth and hot food on offer. In Brecon, people living in 300 properties have been invited to leave their homes for the night to move to a local school to protect them from any potential flooding. There is good news here in that the water seems to be receding here in Ballater, but there is a warning that river levels in some areas might not peak until the early hours of the morning.
Lorna, thank you, Lorna Gordon. The former businesswoman Elizabeth Holmes has been sentenced in the United States to just over 11 years in prison for defrauding investors. Her company, Theranos, made her a billionaire with claims it could diagnose a range of medical conditions using a tiny testing device and just a few drops of blood. But the technology didn't exist. The firm secretly used other companies' conventional testing devices to produce results. Police in Northern Ireland say they're treating a bomb attack in Strabane as the attempted murder of 2 officers. An explosive device caused damage to a patrol vehicle shortly before 11 o'clock last night. A security alert is continuing and the affected area is cordoned off. Now, they are built to bring gas from Russia to Western Europe. Now, investigators say a series of blasts on 2 underwater gas pipelines earlier this year were the result of serious sabotage. Swedish prosecutors found traces of explosives near the pipelines. Well, the explosions in late September in the Baltic Sea, close to the Danish island Bornholm, targeted the pipelines Nord Stream 1 and 2. It comes, of course, at a time of tension between Europe and Russia because of the war in Ukraine and during an energy crisis. Russia denies any involvement. Our Europe editor Katia Adler has been given exclusive access to the underwater site of the blast and sent us this report.
This is a new front line in Russia's conflict against Ukraine and the West. Vladimir Putin has warned energy infrastructure, how oil and gas travel from source to our homes, is at risk. This is why the West believes him. 3 explosions were detonated on major gas lines between Russia and Europe earlier this autumn. Moscow denies responsibility.
Hello, good morning.
We set off in search of answers with exclusive access and the help of underwater drone experts. Look how the concrete casing around the pipe was ripped apart. That, say intelligence sources, would need the force of a huge car bomb.
An explosion or something really just bending this metal, and you can really...
This has been shot up out of the seabed.
Yeah.
We learned the damage was far more extensive than widely believed, but we may never know for sure what happened here. As we filmed, a Danish surveillance plane circled nearby, and also...
We can see a Swedish warship, Danish warship, and also a Russian offshore boat.
Is that usual, this kind of activity?
No, it's not usual at all.
Not usual at all. The backdrop to this sabotage is Russia's war. The countries investigating here are keeping intelligence close to their chest. So that was ripped off the pipeline itself?
Yeah, at some point I can.
But one thing has become clear from the pipeline debris. This explosion here in the Baltic Sea has heightened all of our awareness of the importance of undersea infrastructure, but also the huge difficulty in protecting them. Our energy supplies rely on a spider web of subsea pipelines. Also underwater are thousands of miles of internet cables, keeping us connected and enabling trillions of pounds worth of financial transactions a day. You can see how vulnerable the system is. NATO member Norway is the main gas supplier now for the UK and EU. Fears of sabotage and espionage means it's stepped up surveillance dramatically in the North Sea.
Any further disruption of energy is obviously directly affecting European security. We see it as vital to protect it and to provide a prolonged and steady presence.
It's the first time the Navy here has taken media on this patrol. We joined officers investigating a growing number of drone sightings near the rigs. There's been a spate of arrests in Norway of people suspected of spying for Russia. Political pressure is mounting. Millions of families across Europe fear the coming winter, and governments from France to the UK to Germany want to know they really can rely on Norway's energy supply. NATO allies, including the UK, are scrambling to improve marine capabilities. If oil and gas infrastructure is attacked, and as you say, it's so crucial, could it be considered an act of war?
An attack on allied critical infrastructure could trigger our collective defense clause. An attack on one ally can or will trigger the response from the whole alliance.
Strong words NATO would rather not act on, preferring to avoid military conflict with Russia. But closer to our homes, Moscow is waging non-conventional warfare, threatening our gas supplies, hoping to destabilise Europe and reduce support for Kiev. Katya Adler, BBC News, Norway.
A trade union representing Twitter staff in the UK has written to the social media company expressing concern about the way they're being treated. Employees were told by email yesterday that they're shut out of their offices until Monday. Twitter's new owner, Elon Musk, has told staff they must agree to work long hours at high intensity or leave. Twitter's headquarters are in San Francisco. From there, James Clayton reports.
30 seconds left. 35 seconds.
These employees are counting down the seconds before they leave Twitter's offices for good.
I've been here 9 years and 9 months now.
When Elon Musk bought Twitter 3 weeks ago for £37 billion, he walked into the office holding a sink. Let that sink in, he quipped. Yet since then, Twitter has gone from crisis to crisis. More than 50% of Twitter's staff have already been sacked, and for them, it's no laughing matter. He gave an ultimatum this week to remaining employees. Either accept extremely hardcore working hours and conditions or leave. Many have had enough. One employee who quit told me, "I didn't want to work for someone who threatened us over email multiple times about only exceptional tweets should work here when I was already working 60 to 70 hours weekly." Twitter is a hugely influential communications platform used by global politicians and opinion formers with more than 200 million daily active users. Staff working at Twitter HQ behind me have talked of chaos, that entire teams have been disbanded. The offices have now been closed till next week. And with so few people now left at Twitter, there are concerns that if the platform runs into problems, there's no one left to fix them. One Twitter investor, though, says it's too early to write off Mr. Musk.
This whole assumption that somehow everything's going to be worse is completely ridiculous when Twitter has been so mismanaged and so poorly run for so long. It's, I think, a little premature to just judge Elon as a failure when he's been there for 3 weeks.
Mr. Musk, though, seems confident. He tweeted, "The best people are staying. I'm not super worried." He clearly thinks Twitter needs radical change. But the world's richest person is showing both his risk-taking and his ruthlessness. James Clayton, BBC News, San Francisco.
And that takes us to a look at the weather prospects. Thomas Schaffelak is here. Hello.
Jane, hello. And a very good evening to you. The picture behind me sums up the weather for this weekend. It is going to be a mixed bag. Some sunshine, some showers on the way as well. And I think quite a chilly Sunday in the forecast. But let's talk about that rain in Scotland. Not only in Scotland, it's been wet in so many parts of the country, but particularly in eastern Scotland. And in the last couple of days or so, we've had about 160 now millimetres of rain in Chart. But the good news is that the rain is easing. The amber warning from the Met Office has now expired, so the weather is improving. Now, across the Atlantic, we can see this next weather system. It's gathering pace. It's sweeping towards us. See this slither of clearer weather across the UK? That's where it's going to be around 6 o'clock in the morning. So clear skies for Ireland, for many parts of Western England, Wales and Scotland. Quite chilly here, a touch of frost in the countryside. And I think through the course of the morning, many areas will have sunshine and indeed lasting into the afternoon. But eastern coasts will be often cloudy, spits and spots of rain here and only 7 degrees. And then here we have the next weather front racing off the Atlantic. That weather front will be spreading into Northern Ireland come the afternoon and evening. And then it should reach the Irish Sea coasts by around about 11 o'clock midnight. And then Saturday night into Sunday, that weather front sweeps across the UK. So many of us will get rain on Saturday night. And then behind it, quite often what happens, we get that rush of strong Atlantic winds, frequent showers, so pockets of heavy rain. And they will be affecting mostly western areas. Some of them could be heavy, perhaps thundery as well. The best of the weather probably towards the east of the country. But wherever you are, it's going to be a chilly sort of day. So in that breeze, 8 degrees Celsius will feel. Back to you.
Thomas, thank you very much. Thank you. That is the BBC News at 10 on Friday, the 18th of November. Of course, there's analysis starting now over on Newsnight. That's on BBC Two with Victoria Derbyshire just getting underway. The news continues here, of course, on BBC One because it's time to join our colleagues across the nations and regions for the news wherever you are. So from everybody on the 10 team, I wish you a very good night.